All right, guys. So it's been a little while since my last React video. Um, if you missed it and want to go back and see it, it's a very introductory uh, video to just the basic concepts of React, how to pass state and props down into child components, and changing the state and doing that kind of thing. So it's just building a simple to-do list. Doesn't look pretty at all, but it works. So if you want to go and check that out, feel free. What we're going to talk about today is React Router. Again, this is just going to be a very simple tutorial. You're not going to build anything complex. That's not the point. The point is to understand the concepts so that then you can use those tools to go and build something a little bit more complex later on. So all we're going to do is we're going to build three different pages, like a home page, an about page, and a contact page. Um, and we're going to be able to navigate between those. So what I've got first, if you use Create React App, it's a really good way to get up and running. This is Create React App. I restructured it just a little bit, making it a components folder inside of my source directory, and then I'm going to store all my components in there. So that's the way that I like to do it. Doesn't mean it's the right way. That's just the way that I like to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and build out three components: a home component, an about component, and a contact component. So let me go ahead and just build those real fast. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can build your components depending on what your situation is. All right, so the most common way to do it would look something like this. You always have to import React, right? So this is a pretty standard way to build your components. I always like to export it before I do anything else, just so I don't forget. That's always really annoying when you put all this work into a component and you forget to export it and your app breaks. So export default the component name, and then I'm going to say class home extends component, and then I'm going to have the render method, and then I've got to return something. So the home component. All right, cool. So that should work if I were to actually render that home component. Let's just see. So my linter is doing some auto correcting here, or my prettier extension. Let's go ahead and we'll fix this in just a minute. So home, we got to import home. All right, so now let's see. All right, cool. So we should see home component on the screen. Let's see. Over here. There it is. All right, cool. So we know that that's working. And then we'll build the about component. We'll do the same thing. We're going to take a slightly different approach. And then actually, before we do that, let me kind of refactor this. So there's actually no need for to bring in this component piece right here because we're not doing anything with state or like we're not really using other methods. All we're really doing is it's this is a presentational component, so, right? So it's not doesn't have its own state or anything like that. So we can actually get rid of this and turn this into a presentational component or a functional component. It's got a couple different names. So this is just going to look like a traditional function. Typically, you want to pass in props right there. Although this isn't going to have any props, but this will work just the same, and I would expect that this still renders just fine, and it does. This is hot reloading, so if it broke, I would get lots of errors right here. So that's working. And then, like, let's say if I needed to pass in props for some reason, I could do that here. I could say props.title, and then come over here and say the title is, I don't know, bacon, and then there it is, right? So it's the same idea of passing props in, but you don't need the this keyword. You're just because you're just calling props directly right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that back the way it was. All right, cool. So let's build out the other components. I'm gonna show you a couple other things about the way that you can build your components. So about we're gonna say import React. And then now, instead of component, we're going to say fragment. We're going to talk about what that does if you're not already familiar with it. Export default about. All right, so we're still going to make this a presentational component. About takes props, although we're not going to be using any props. And then return, don't forget the return. I sometimes forget to do that if I just have a presentational component. And then now, instead of saying div, like this, let's say that you're building your React application and you want to build your component, but you don't want to wrap it in div. You have to wrap your component uh, in something. Every component has to return a single JSX element, and then you can have all these children within it, but the outermost element has to just be a single element. So let's say that you don't want to add anything to the DOM whenever it renders. That's where with the, I believe this was with React 16, with the latest React, you can just say fragment. And I'll go ahead and load this up so you can see it. Let me go over here, and that was about, I believe. I'll have to import it. I like to always do my libraries here and then my handmade components here in between. If I have any of my own like helper methods or APIs or anything like that, I put those in there. So now if we go over here, I've got both components, but if we inspect this, if we look at the source, you'll notice the home component is wrapped in a div, but the about component is just that h1 tag. And that's because the fragment doesn't actually render to the DOM, but it allows you to wrap your component in a JSX element without having to add something to the DOM. So you know, it's a really nice little feature that came recently with React. And then let's go and create our contact component. So one other way you could do it, if it's a presentational component, I guess you could do this with a class component as well, but we're going to say, of course, import React from React. There are snippets you can use with your text editors if you don't want to write all of this every time. I like to write it because, I don't know, I just like having good habits and understanding what's happening. So we know this is a functional component, so if I write my function contact props return, and we're going to go ahead and say div h1 contact component. Now notice I didn't export it down here. We can actually just say export default and then function. We can do that, and that should still work the same way. Let's go ahead and import it and see. Also like to alphabetize my order up here, as long as that doesn't affect anything with rendering, you know. Like if something's dependent on something else, then maybe that would be an issue, but none of these are dependent on each other. So that still works just the same, right? And so I just export it as I call it. I actually don't like to do it this way. It's just, to me, that's not super readable. I like exporting it right at the end. So, but that's just me. So we'll go ahead and leave these three different ways up just so that you can kind of see them and see how they're different. Um, so anyway, usually these presentational components are going to be more at the lower like child level. Your upper components typically are going to have state. If a component doesn't have state, it's probably a child of something, and probably doesn't have children. You know. Anyway, so now we're here to talk about React Router, right? So let's say that we want to be able to kind of flip between these three components. There's an npm package called React Router DOM. It used to be just called React Router, but then with React Native coming about, they wanted to specify the difference. So if we just go over here, we can say npm install React Router DOM. You actually don't have to do the dash dash save anymore. I think that's with npm version 5, maybe. I'm not sure. But I'll show you. This is actually going to save to my package.json. Like if I go over here, package.json, notice there's not React Router DOM, but it's almost done. All right, there it is. It's done. So go over here, package.json, and there it is. So it does save as a dependency by default. There's a flag you can pass in if you don't want it to save for whatever reason, but you almost always do. All right, cool. So we've installed React Router. So now we're going to import two things for now. So we're gonna import browser router, but I want to have it give it an alias of router, and then route from React Router DOM. All right, cool. So now what we can do is inside this app component, we can call router. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete these three. Now we can pass each of these a route. And so I always say two at first. It's actually path. I have a terrible habit of writing two first and then trying to figure out why my app's not working. So route, path, and then you pass in the component that you want to render. Route, always type everything. Try not to copy and paste a lot. It's just good to be in the habit of typing. About, component, the about, and then path, contact, component, contact. All right, cool. Now this actually isn't going to work. We're going to get an error saying that router can only be passed in a single element. All right, router may only have one child element. So we're going to just wrap this in a div. You know what? Let's do it in a fragment instead. This would be a perfect case in which you would want to use a fragment because you're not necessarily wanting to add an extra outer div just because. All right, so there we go. So that should be working. All right, cool. Now if you notice, all I have is the home component. Cool. So we're going to do a couple things here. So I would expect that if I go to the about path and the contact path, that this will work. I would see the about component and the contact component. Let's see what happens. Maybe it won't work. Go to about. Huh. Weird, right? All right, so what's happening here? With React Router, it finds everything that matches to be true. So when I went to /about, well, this was still true. So it rendered the home component. It checked this was true. So it rendered the about component. It checked this, and this was not true. So it did not render the contact component, if that kind of makes sense. So that's kind of the way that router works by default. There are a couple of ways around this. Here's one way of doing it. You can pass in exact, and what that's going to do is it'll only render this if this matches exactly. This is one really easy, quick fix. So now already you can see contact goes to just the contact component, about gives you just the about, and then the index route gives you the home component. So that's one solution. Okay, this one is not a bad one, but it's not my preferred one. What I like to do instead is import something called switch. What switch does is it uh, loops over the routes and it renders the first match. So I'm going to go ahead and change this fragment to switch, which means I don't need that up here anymore because I'm still only rendering one child inside of router. And so now I can get rid of exact and let me save. All right, so there's that. If I go to about, uh-oh, and contact, oh no, it's the home component every time. All right, so if you remember what I said was that it finds the first match. So again, this index route is a match for slash about slash contact, right? Because this part is still true. It does start with the slash, right? So it will just render the home component and then it just stops because of this switch tag, right? So that's why that's happening. So one solution for that then is to, you could either pass in exact, or what I like to do is I just like to have my less uh, complex routes at the end. So I go from like more complex to more simple. And now, if just by switching this order, that should work. So I have the home component, cool. Go to slash about, the about component, go to slash contact, and the contact component. All right, cool. So it looks like we're in business. Now, this isn't going to do you much good if you're having to type in the URL. And also, if you notice, if I go to this, if you watch this little refresh button, really quickly it refreshes, right? That's not really the reason that you want to use React Router. I mean, I guess that's part of it, but one of the really cool things about React Router is that you don't actually have to re-render the browser, which is a really, really powerful thing. So we're just going to really quickly build a nav bar that we're going to throw in here. So let's call it just navbar.js, import React from React. And we're going to say function navbar. I'm going to do it without props this time, so we don't actually need it if we're not using it. Usually you'll need it. All right, so div, let's create an unordered list. And then what we're going to do, so traditionally outside of React, you would use anchor tags, right? Like you've all seen this, right? href of, some path, right? But that's not really the React way to do things. That's going to cause a refresh of your browser, which you don't want for React. And so what we're going to do, also part of React Router, is something called link. This is essentially an anchor tag. It renders to the DOM as an anchor tag. So the syntax looks like this. So I can pass in home, and then this is where you do that to attribute. I always want to put, for whatever reason, I always want to put to on my route JSX elements, but I always just get those mixed up. So anyway, cool. So now we can do the same thing. We're going to say about. And then we're going to do the same thing for contact. All right, cool. So that should be good to go. Now we need to import it here. And then I could put it in here, but that would give me an error, right? Because if you remember, router is only allowed to have one child element. So this should throw an error, and it does, right? So we can put that inside of our switch statement, which kind of works. I don't know. I like to kind of maybe put this, we're going to bring the fragment back into this. So I like to only have routes inside my switch statement. bring fragment back. I believe this should work. Yeah, cool. And so now we've got our links here, and they work. And if you watch this refresh icon up here, you notice that it's never actually refreshing. And remember, if I were to bring this back up here, then I'm always going to see home component, no matter what I click, because that's the first match. I could pass in exact as a prop, and then it should work. And it does. If you like that way, that's cool. I just like to have it this way. That's just my own taste. So you pick which way works for you. But yeah, that's it. These are the basics of React Router. I'm going to show you one more thing that I remembered I wanted to talk about. There's another cool thing that React Router does, which is called redirect. So like, let's say that you have a user who submits a form, and then after the form submits and you get a response from the server and everything's cool, maybe send a pop-up message saying, you know, your info has been saved, your form has been submitted, and then you want to redirect them. You outside of React, that might be something like window.location.href equals blah blah blah, right? But again, that's not the React way to do things because that causes a browser refresh and all this. So they have something called redirect, and so I'll put this on the about page. So we're gonna say import redirect from React Router DOM. And then inside of this, let's say, okay, we're going to change this into a class-based component. So we're going to use some state. All right, and that which means we've got to have a render method now. Sorry for the slow refactor. All right, now let's see. So now we're going to have some state. And so we're going to say redirect. Redirect. It's been a really long day. All right, redirect is false. Okay, and then if hopefully you're familiar with your lifecycle hooks. If you're not, that's okay. Maybe I'll do a video just on the lifecycle methods. There's some really cool stuff you can do with those. But component demount, this just runs as soon as the component mounts. So as soon as it renders. So component demount, I'm going to say, you're never supposed to call set state in here. So I'm going to make another one that says like initialize redirect. And here I'm going to say this dot set state redirect to true. And then actually we're going to make this a little bit more flexible. Redirect. Okay. Cool. It's late, guys. I'm running on fumes here. If you're familiar with ES6, using object literals to, if you have like the key and the value that have the same variable name, like if the key name matches a variable name, then you can just do this. This will be the same as that. And in fact, if you're using a good linter, it will complain if you try to do it the other way. So now I can say component did mount. Now I can say this dot initialize redirect true. So what that's doing is when the component mounts, it's going to run this function, passing in the parameter of true, or the argument of true, and then on this method, it is taking a parameter of redirect. My prettier extension takes away the parentheses, but this is a parameter, and then it sets the state of this value to whatever parameter I pass in, which is true. And then here, for constant redirect, we're going to say this.state.redirect. This is a ternary method, I guess, a ternary operator. So if this.state.redirect is true, then redirect equals the redirect JSX tag. Otherwise, it's null. And then we're going to pass in redirect right here. If you're passing in a variable name or a constant name, then it's got to be wrapped in brackets if it's inside this return statement. So I think we're good. But let's put a set timeout on it. So we're going to say set timeout of 3 seconds. All right, cool. So what I would expect to happen is that when you go to the about page after 3 seconds, well, we don't know where to be redirected to actually. Sorry, a required prop on a redirect is, I believe it's 2, if I'm not mistaken. So this is just going to take us back to the home page. So after 3 seconds, we will flip the state to true for redirect. If every time the state changes, the render function runs, and then if this .state.redirect is true, I could have done this, but it's implied by just doing that. Then redirect equals the redirect element with that prop. Otherwise, if this is false, then it's null. All right, so after 3 seconds, we should be redirected to the home page. So let's see if it happens. We've got errors. Component is not defined. All right. Yeah, so I'd never passed in component here. All right, cool. So I think we should be good now. All right, cool. So we got our home page, contact page, everything's good. Now if we go to the about page, let's see, after 3 seconds, I think I'll be redirected. And 2, 3, there you go. It was redirected back. So that's what redirect does. It's a really cool feature. Again, if you notice, watch this icon. You shouldn't see a refresh. I'm going to go to the about page again. 1, 2, 3, there it goes. This never refreshed at all. So it makes your site incredibly fast, especially when you have a lot of data. Obviously, something like this is going to be fast no matter how you do it. But if you're bringing in, an array of like 500 objects of data, you don't want to have to load that every time. That's where Redux can also become really, really cool. And I think the next video I'm going to do is probably going to be Redux. Maybe I'll do the lifecycle methods, but it'll probably be one or the other, and then the other one will follow. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. I benefit from doing these videos. I enjoy them. I'm always learning. I have a whole lot to learn. But this is my job. I'm a React developer, and I love it. So I hope you enjoyed it too. Feel free to leave comments or ask questions below. Thanks.